cross was always placed where it could not be missed, not hidden in a courtyard, not behind a wall, out where the road ran straight like a shout across open ground, out where the sun rose and hit wood and iron and skin. A cross stood so the living would learn. It stood at the edge of fields, beside city gates, along busy causeways where carts rattled and soldiers marched and sellers cried their fruit. It stood as if it were part of the land itself. It waited there like a mile marker for fear. Tiro saw it when he carried the chamber pot to the gutter at dawn. He did not mean to look. He never meant to look. But the cross pulled the eyes the way a wound pulls a hand. A low fire of light was beginning in the east. It caught on the iron nails and the small plaque above the man's head. Tiro could not read the words. He knew what they said anyway. The charge, the warning, the simple line that turned a person into an example. The air smelled of damp dust, ashes, sour wine, and the slow sweetness of figs in a basket near. Dogs scuffled in the alley. A water seller yawned and hit his bucket with a stick. The chain at Tiro's ankle whispered against his skin as he stepped. It was light, thin bronze, the kind a master said was only for guidance. It felt like a finger on the back of his neck. He kept his eyes down and poured. The waste splashed, ran along the stone channel, and slid away toward the Tiber. A raven on a roof beam made a dry sound and tilted its head toward the cross. Tiro did not tilt his head. He turned, lifted the empty pot, and walked back into the house. This house was like many in Rome, a square of rooms around an open court with painted walls, red, yellow, black, and a pool in the middle where the sky fell and, sometimes, a leaf. The master was a grain contractor. He bought and sold what kept the city alive. He liked his floors swept before he woke. He liked warm bread, a shaved chin, sandals ready by the bed, a new lamp set burning with the flame pointing north, and silence. He liked the fruit cut at a slant, and the water just cold enough to sting the teeth. Tiro had learned these things fast, because he had to. In Rome, a slave learnt fast, or paid for slowness. He had learned something else too. The city taught with pictures. A cross was a picture. A branding iron was a picture. A wooden beam carried on the shoulders was a picture. The pictures were not meant for the one who suffered. He already knew they were meant for everyone who did not yet suffer but could, which was almost everyone like Tiro. Behind the house, in a narrow space by the kitchen, a boy named Cyrus stoked the oven. His hands were pink from heat and ash. He grinned at Tiro without showing his teeth. "You went out?" Cyrus whispered. "Just to the gutter," Tiro said. "Did you see him?" Tiro did not answer. Cyrus shifted his weight, impatient, young. "They put him up fast," the boy said. "I heard the clatter last night. Men with ladders. A soldier laughing. Someone begging. Was he still?" "Do your work," Tiro said, but his voice was soft. He was not the kind to snap. He had learned the weight of words too. They could be used against you if they were loud. They could be broken open and turned into something else. Silence could be a shield. He turned away and began to sweep. The city woke. Hooves rang on stone. Women's sandals made a hush. Over the wall came smells, oil, smoke, onions, river rot, leather. Over the wall came voices, sharp, low, laughing, bargaining. Over the wall came the world that paid the master and owned Tiro's hours. The house itself moved into its rhythm. Scrape, lift, carry, pour, wipe, fold, fetch, wait. The steward's voice cut the air. Faster. The steward was freeborn and thin as a spear. He smiled with only half his mouth. He had an iron keyring that clanked when he walked. "Eyes," the steward said as Tiro laid out the sandals. Tiro kept his head down but moved his eyes the way he knew the steward wanted. The leather was clean, the straps soft, the buckles oiled. In this house, a mistake was not always punished. It was often remembered, filed away, a coin kept for the day when a bigger payment was needed. The master came into the atrium with sleep still on his face and a wool cloak around his shoulders. He nodded at nothing and at everyone. The barber poured water for the shave. The cook set down bread. A girl with a scar on her wrist poured wine into water and did not spill a drop. Outside, someone shouted news. Senators debate the murder. The voice moved down the street like wind. The master paused. "What murder?" he said. "The city prefect," the steward said, "killed by a slave." The barber, who had a gentle touch and a bad habit of talking, sucked in breath. "The whole house," he murmured. "They'll kill them all. That's the law." "Not the law," the master said, pleased to teach. "The custom. Old but useful. A house that cannot keep its people in order is a danger to the city. One slave lifts his hand, 100 more were watching. Do you punish one finger, or do you numb the whole hand? The Senate will decide." The razor slid over the master's cheek. The hair fell in grey curls like filings. Tiro's hands stayed steady on the sandal straps, but his chest had gone tight. He knew the story, the way a man knows a road he has not walked. A master dead by a slave's knife. A trial the house cannot hope to win. A sentence that does not count heads one by one, but swallows all at once. Men, women, children. Old ones who could not lift a bucket. Babies not yet named. Cooks who had never seen the master's face. Stable boys who had not yet learned a horse. The city did not ask who held the blade. The city killed the house. It was a lesson, and it was meant to take root in every other house. The master chewed his bread. "If they let them live," he said, "every servant in Rome will feel taller tomorrow. That cannot happen." He drank and wiped his mouth. "The city runs by fear and grain. I provide one, the Senate provides the other." "Shall I send a man to the market early?" the steward asked. "Send 2, the master said. "People talk better with food." Tiro bowed his head and crossed the room to fetch the master's belt. His hands felt far away. He saw, in his mind, not the cross by the road, but a field of them, the kind men had talked about in whispers, the ones down near Capua when the army put down the great slave rising. The road to the south had been lined with bodies, so the elders said. Miles and miles of black shapes on pale wood. You did not need to see such a thing to learn from it. It was in the city's bones now, in its talk, in its eyes. The master went out with 2 clients, trailing like shadows. The steward counted lamps. The cook scolded Cyrus. The barber washed his hands and looked at Tiro with a small, worried look that was almost kind. "Keep your head," he said in a way that could mean anything. Tiro kept sweeping. He swept the same line of floor again and again, which was foolish, and he knew it was foolish. He made himself move to the corner where dust hid in the seams. He began to count his breaths. He had learned that too. Counting was a rope you could hold when the river pulled. By mid-morning, the road by the house was crowded. The cry of the newsman rose and fell. "The Senate sits! The Senate sits!" A woman with dyed hair cursed a mule. A man with fish on a string laughed and then stopped, as if laughter had become expensive. The cross at the gutter's end made a thin shadow now. There were flies on the wood. There were boys with stones in their hands who did not throw them because their fathers were watching. In the cool shadow of the colonnade, an old woman sat with a tray of small cakes. She sold them to whoever had 1 copper coin and a sweet tooth. Tiro had neither. He did have ears, though, and ears in Rome were a kind of coin if you knew what to do with them. He moved to the doorway to shake a rug. He shook slowly in time with the talk. "They will not do it," a man said. 400 souls? The people will not stand it. The people will shout and go home, another said. They like drama. This is drama. Not only drama, a third voice said, quiet. It is order. There is a knife in the order. The knife must be shown to be useless. Tiro knew none of their faces. He knew the words, the way a man knows the weather. The words made the air heavy. He had not always lived inside such words. He had not always lived where a cross was a nail in the sky. Once there had been a hillside and a woman who tied a string around his wrist so he would not stray. There had been a smell of sheep and thyme and a small creek that ran over stones like fingers over a harp. He had thought the world was made of grass and sun and the backs of animals when they breathed. He did not let those pictures stay long. Pictures could be cruel. If you held them too hard, they would cut you. He folded them like cloth and put them away. He wiped his hands on his tunic. He picked up the broom again. At noon, the master returned with a thin gold chain around his neck and a red mark on his cheek from the razor. His eyes were bright in a way that meant he had had news and liked the way it tasted. "Well?" the steward asked, quick. "They will do it," the master said. "They must. The prefect was a high man, the knife was a low hand, the gap must be filled with blood." "The people?" the steward said. "Protested," the master said, pleased. "They like to be righteous for a morning." The Senate reminded them of a fire last year when slaves ran in the panic and took what they wished. The Senate asked if the people preferred a city where masters feared sleep. The people understood. They went home. Soldiers will line the streets. The sentence will be carried out at once. The room seemed suddenly too small. The pool in the center reflected a square of hard blue sky. A fly buzzed at the rim and failed to find the water. The barber dropped a basin. It made a round, white sound. "Bread," the master said, as if he were hungry, though he was not. "Fine, and tell the porter to close the door. We do not need beggars in the atrium today." Tyro carried the wine. He poured it carefully and did not spill. He did not look at the master's face. He kept his eyes on the cup, on the rim that caught a little light. The master took it and drank, and when he set it down there was a wet ring on the table, like a round sentence. The steward said, "They will use the cross." "For some," the master said. "For the rest, anything that shows a lesson. There are many ways to teach, but the cross," he added, as if he were naming a tool, "is perfect for slaves. It is slow, it is public, it is low enough to see and high enough to reach no one's hand. It keeps the living away from the dying. It turns the ground itself into an audience." He said it as if he was speaking of account books. The room was quiet. The cook coughed in the kitchen. A child in the alley cried and was hushed. A hawk hung in the air above the courtyard, as if it were pinned to the sky with an invisible nail. Tyra thought of things he had heard in the slave barracks from men who had survived punishments and from men who knew someone who had not. First, the flogging, they said, the iron hooks or the knotted cords. The back opened like a field after ploughing. Then the beam, the heavy crosspiece called the patibulum, laid on the shoulders, the walk through the street with the sign around the neck, the spit, the fruit thrown, the boys who made jokes. Then the place outside the wall. The upright post waiting, already used, already dark with old stains, the arms stretched, the nails or ropes, the feet pinned, the body lifting itself to breathe, falling, lifting, falling, until the breath turned thin and the heart forgot its work. None of this was secret. It was the opposite of secret. It was a kind of theatre whose ticket price was fear. You learned how to live by watching how others died. Tiro went to the doorway again with a different rug. The day had moved a little. The cross's shadow had moved a little too. A line of men in chain collars passed, each with a basket on his head. They did not turn their heads. A woman with a baby pulled the cloth higher over the child's face as she went by. A soldier stood in the street and scraped mud from his sandal with a stick while he stared at the cross as if it were a map he could not read. "Will you go to see?" Cyrus asked at his shoulder. "Small, quick." "No," Tiro said. "I want to," Cyrus whispered. "Not to laugh, to know, so I can stay alive." Tiro looked at the boy then, really looked, saw the ash on his lashes, the heat bloom on his cheeks, the hunger in his eyes that was not for food. He thought of when he too had believed that knowledge alone could save a person. He wanted to say something kind and true and useful. He said nothing. He put a hand on Cyrus's head for a breath and then took it away. The house worked. The city moved. Far away, a horn sounded sharp, and then again. News ran through the streets like a dog. It has begun. Not long after, a man pounded on the door with the flat of his hand, hard, official. The porter looked to the steward. The steward nodded. The porter opened. Two soldiers stood outside, their shields on their backs, their faces red from sun or wine or habit. By order of the city, one said, all household slaves are to remain within walls until the executions are complete. Any found near the forum or the execution ground will be taken. Of course, the steward said smoothly. We keep a quiet house. The soldier's eyes slid past him into the atrium, over Tyr, over Cyrus, over the girl with the scar. He counted without moving his mouth. He raised his chin toward the cross at the street's end. Look well, he said, his tone not unkind, as if he were offering advice to men who might drown. Look once and remember. If you forget, we will help you remember. They left. The porter closed the door. The sound of it was like a hand over a mouth. For a while nobody spoke. Then the master said, business, returning to his voice like blood returning to a limb. Work. The world continues. The ships still come. The grain still flows. Rome is a machine. It runs on what we feed it. Tiro went back to the storeroom to fetch jars, to lift and set down, to fold and unfold. But his mind did not stay in the storeroom. It went to the gate where the soldiers stood. It went to the road where the crowd pressed. It went to the place outside the wall where the ground was hard and the wind had no mercy. It went to a rope and a beam and a sound like a hammer kissing iron. It went to the moment when a man's body betrayed him, and he lifted himself toward pain because the only other choice was not breathing at all. He tried to think of other things. He tried to think of numbers. He tried to think of his mother's hands. But the cross was a nail that pinned his thoughts where they did not want to stay. Why did public crucifixion terrify every Roman slave? The answer was not only pain. Pain was a storm that broke and passed. The cross was something slower. It was a lesson about time. You could not hurry it. You could not bargain with it. You could not hide from it, because it was placed where the whole world came and went. It taught that your body, your hours, your breath itself belonged to others. It taught that your death could be used to shape the minds of people who would not even know your name. It taught this not in secret, but in sun. And there was something else, something most slaves did not say out loud, but felt in the marrow. The cross told them that even without a crime, they were already close to it, by the way Rome counted bodies. A free man could be flogged and go home. A citizen could appeal. A slave was a tool, and a broken tool was a warning. And a warning must be displayed. The afternoon lengthened. The city's sound went lower, as if many throats were tired at once. A seller whose voice had been strong in the morning now spoke like a man who had climbed a hill. Somewhere a mother sang to a child in a tone that tried to be sweet and could not quite. Near evening, the crowd began to flow back from the place outside the wall. They came in clumps, talking in short bursts, or not talking at all. Some looked sick, some looked bright with a kind of hard light in their faces, the sort that men wore after a riot or a chariot race. A boy carried a broken piece of a stick as if it were a trophy. A woman crossed herself in the way people cross themselves when they were not sure which gods were watching. The ravens had become a moving black in the sky. The cross at the gutter's end still held the morning's man. He was now a darker shape. The flies were a cloud that had no wind of its own and yet moved. The plaque above his head caught the last thin ribbon of sun. A dog stopped and stared and then trotted on, nails clicking on stone. The city smelled of metal and heat and something sweet that was not sweet. The master sat in the triclinium and ate with two clients who laughed too loudly. The steward stood by with his key ring like a chain of small bells. The barber put away his blade. Cyrus fell asleep on a sack of flour and dreamed with his mouth open. Tiro went to the doorway and watched the road because he could not watch. A girl of maybe 12 walked past with a basket of wilted greens and a little brother in tow. She kept her eyes on the ground. The boy looked up once, quick, and then down again as if the sky had scolded him. A man in a tunic too fine for his face wiped his mouth and spat and swore that the Senate had saved the city. Another said the gods would judge. Another said there were no gods. A priest walked by with his head turned away from the cross, as if it were bad luck to see another god's work. In Tiro's chest a small thing began to move. It was not hope. Hope was a bird with bright feathers and a silly song, and Rome did not feed such birds. It was not rage. Rage was hot and easy and would get a man noticed by the wrong eyes. It was something cooler, more stubborn. It was a question that would not lie down. How did a person stay a person under a thing designed to turn him into a lesson? He did not yet have an answer. He had only the shape of the question. He turned it over in his mind like a stone. He felt its weight. He felt its edges. He felt that if he could keep holding it, he might live longer than if he dropped it. Night finally pulled its shawl over the city. Lamps were lit. The pool in the atrium held a square of black. The cross at the road's end became a darker stitch in a dark cloth. Somewhere far away, a cry went up and then broke apart. The soldiers at the gate shifted their feet and spoke low. The city slept the way a big animal sleeps, one ear open. Tiro lay on his mat with the chain at his ankle coiled neatly like a polite snake. He closed his eyes. He opened them. He closed them again. He saw the cross when he closed them and when he opened them. He let his breath go in and out and counted. He reached for the cool, stubborn question and held it. How do you stay human where the cross stands? Outside, a foot scuffed near the door, then another, then many, soft as moths, the porter's voice, low, uncertain. Who's there? A new voice answered, clipped, official, dull with long use. Open. By order of the city, we will search and count. The chain at Tiro's ankle felt suddenly very heavy. They came with tablets, cords, and eyes that did not blink much. The porter lifted the bar. Soldiers stepped into the atrium, bringing the smell of iron and dust. Behind them came two city clerks in hooded cloaks. One held a wax tablet and a stylus. The other held a cord with knots. He used it the way a butcher uses a string to measure meat. By order of the prefect's office, the lead soldier said, voice flat, from saying the same words at other doors. We will count and register all household slaves. You will remain still until the count is done. Any found hiding will be taken as guilty. The steward nodded as if this were common rain. We keep a quiet house, he said again, the phrase he wore like a ring. They will stand. He clapped. The sound went through the rooms like a stone across water. He smelled faintly of mildew and old fish. Names, he said. The steward began to recite. Cyrus, oven boy. Menes, porter. Dora, laundry. Hylas, barber. Tiro. The clerk stopped him with a lift of the stylus. Not his name, he said. His mark. He meant the small metal tag that some houses hung around a slave's neck. Some tags had words stamped into them. If found, return to master. Some said, I have run. Catch me. The steward hesitated just a breath. The soldier's eyes did not move. The steward recovered. No tags in this house, he said. We are known to the neighbours, none of ours stray. The soldier's mouth made no shape. He gave the slightest nod to the second clerk, the one with the cord. The cordman moved down the line. He stood in front of each slave, pulled the cord across chest and shoulders as if measuring for a yoke, then looped it, made a knot, and wrote a number with his finger into the wax. When he reached Tiro, he did not look at Tiro's face. He ran the cord from left shoulder to right hip, measuring the span, the way a carpenter measures a board. He made a new knot. He wrote again, 2 knots, twice the mark. Tiro understood. If one vanished, the other would tell. "What is that for?" Cyrus whispered, after the cord had moved on, his voice a grain of sound. "So they know if we are the same bodies tomorrow," Tiros said, barely moving his lips. "So they can say, 'You, come,' and we cannot say, 'No, that was another man.'" The stylus scratched, the soldier walked, the house breathed the way a trapped animal breathes, shallow, careful, in a room that seems to be shrinking. "Tasks?" the stylus clerk said without looking up. The steward gave each person a label: oven, horse, water, blade, broom. When he reached Tiro, he said, "Hall and errands." The soldier's head turned a little at the word errands. His eye paused. He made a mark beside Tiro's number. "Errands will be suspended," the soldier said. "Until the executions are complete, no slave from this house goes out unless the city calls him." The steward bowed. "As the city wills." Outside, the street sounded thicker now. Voices leaned together, then pulled apart. The cross at the end of the lane had its own gravity, pulling glances and words the way a deep pool pulls thrown stones. The soldier finished the walk. The clerk closed his tablet. The cordman pulled a little slack through his knots and wrapped the cord away. They did not sit. They did not drink. They turned to the door. "Keep them within walls," the soldier said. "The city is teaching a lesson. It must be seen that the house keeps order while the city keeps justice. We return at dusk for a second count." They left. The bar fell back into place. The house exhaled through its teeth. "Back to work," the steward said, as if work could wash the taste of the visit from the mouth. "Clean, prepare, stand ready." They obeyed because habit is what keeps bones from rattling. Cyrus went to the oven. The girl carried water. The barber sharpened his blade with a soft song he did not know he was singing. Hero swept a corner that was already clean, but the rhythm had a knock in it now, like a wheel with a stone stuck in its groove. People moved, but also listened. They heard the city humming like a taut string. They heard the trickle of news, the way a thirsty man hears a river. "All the house," someone breathed at a distance. "Yes, all." "Outside the Esquiline gate," someone else said. "That hill." "There will be ropes too," a third voice added. "The kind of man who knows tools. And a beam already used, you can smell it." Tero kept the broom moving. He pulled the strokes long and even, as if he could teach his heart by teaching his arm. He remembered something older slaves had taught him in whispers. Rome calls crucifixion the servile punishment. In Latin, they used a hard phrase, supplicium servile. It meant the kind of death that nailed a slave to a lesson. You could kill a free man by the sword, quickly, clean, with dignity left in his mouth. A slave was stretched on wood and made into a sign. He was a warning, written in a language every eye could read. The master came back out from the triclinium where he had been eating with his clients. He wiped his fingers on a cloth and looked pleased, the way a banker looks pleased when the numbers line up the way he hoped. "We are registered," the steward said. "Good," the master said. "We will not be accused of hiding vermin." He turned to Tiro. "You, bring oil to the warehouse." "No." He stopped himself, thinking of the soldier's warning. The line between his brows deepened. "Send a free boy. I will not pay a fine for your feet." The steward nodded. He flicked his fingers, and a thin client who wanted to be useful leapt forward to take the oil jar instead of Tiro. The client's ring glinted. He trotted out into the street, face bright with the joy of being seen. "Master?" the steward said, Voice low, "The neighbour's house will be searched next." Their porter is a talker. He says the murdered prefect kept a hard rod and iron collars. His slaves wore the brand for runaway, F on the forehead, burned with a punch. He says too much, the master replied. But it does not matter. The Senate has already decided. The old rule stands. He meant the rule Tiro had heard about in the barracks. When a master dies at a slave's hand, every slave in that house dies, unless they can show they fought for the master or could not reach him. The law had a name, long as a road. Men called it an old senatus consultum, a decree from the days when they feared their own shadows after the servile wars. It was not soft, it was not meant to be. Is it law? The barber asked from his corner, softer than a moth. Or is it memory? It is both, the master said, as if that were a clever game, and that is why it works. The sun climbed, the house did not settle. A smell of hot brick bled in from the street. Somewhere a mule brayed as if an iron nail were under his hoof. Tiro went to the doorway to shake a rug and look without being seen to look. From here he could see the lane's end and the cross that stood like a letter with no ink. He could see the plaque above the man's head catching light. He could see the slow thread of people who walked by, trying not to stare and staring anyway. He could see two boys practicing being men by pretending the sight did not frighten them. Their mouths were hard, their fingers shook. "What do you see?" Cyrus whispered, appearing as he always did, fast and close. "A lesson," Tiro said. "I want to read it." "You are already reading it," Tiro said back. "This is how it works. They put it where you cannot avoid it. They say, 'Learn with your eyes, so we do not have to teach your skin.'" Tyrus swallowed. His throat moved like a small fish. "Do you think," he asked, "that the slaves of that house fought for their master?" Tyrus did not answer. He knew what the Senate said. If you do not shout, you are guilty. If you do not run at the knife, you are guilty. If you do not die defending the man who owns you, you are guilty. It was a kind of math that moved only one way. By mid-afternoon, the first crowd began to flow back from the execution ground at the Esquiline. The Esquiline Hill had been gardens once, and graves, and the city still used its far side for things it did not want to keep in the middle of the map. Tanners, burners, the guild of undertakers, who worked under the goddess Libitina, and the place where ropes bit and wood creaked. People came back with dust on their sandals and a new tightness around their eyes. "3 with nails," a man said to another at the fountain outside. "2 with ropes, 1 beaten first, badly." "Why different?" the second asked. "The charge on the boards," the first said as if reading accounts. 1 fled. 1 spoke. 1 lifted his hand. They like to make each crime its own picture. A woman carrying greens pushed past. Her lips moved. She counted on her fingers without numbers, as if trying to convince herself that the world still added up. Late in the day the soldiers came again, like promised rain. "Second count," the lead one said. "You kept them in?" "We did," the steward replied. He made his mouth small, a sign of obedience without shame. He lined them up again. The cordman went down the line and pulled the knots like a man checking a net. He stopped at Tiro and tugged. The knot held. He grunted, wrote a mark. The soldier looked at the steward. 2 for the city at dawn, he said. "Each good for lifting. We need hands on the hill. The guild of Libitina is short. You will provide them." The steward did not argue. He had learned the weight of arguing. He bowed his head and said, "Of course. Which 2? The soldier's eyes went down the line, lazy as if picking fruit. They paused on Tiro's shoulders, moved on, came back. They paused on Cyrus's small frame and went past. "Him," he said, touching Tiro with the flat of 2 fingers on the chest, leaving a print of dust. "And him." He pointed at Manez, the porter, a big man with a soft centre who carried doors like other men carry baskets. Cyrus made a sound without air. It was not a word. Tyro felt his own breath steady, as if a weight had been set on it, and now it would not fly away. "Dawn," the soldier said. "Esquiline Gate. These two will report to the rope captain. If they do not come, we will take 4 next time." He left. The bar fell again. The house stood very still. The steward looked at Tiro and Manes the way a man looks at jars he must deliver without breaking. "Sleep," he said. "Eat. Do not be useless in the morning." The master, who had listened without speaking, lifted his cup and drank as if to toast something only he could see. "Do not shame my house," he said, a small smile flicking at one corner of his mouth. "Say the word. Do not run. Do not weep. If you are seen to be steady, it is good for me." Manes nodded, big head slow. Tiro did not nod. He did not lift his eyes. He went to the kitchen, took a bowl of barley porridge and ate it without tasting it. Syra stood beside him with hands he could not stop from moving. "I can go instead," the boy said. "I can carry. I can be quick. They will not notice." "They will notice," Tiro said. "That is the point." Sirios wiped his hands on his tunic and left a grey patch of ash. "What will they make you do?" "Lift," Tiro said. "Carry, touch what others turn away from. Make the picture clear." He did not say what else he had heard from the old mouths in the barracks, that sometimes the city made slaves help with the tools, help with the ropes, help with the wood, so that the lesson would sit down inside them and not leave. It was not enough to look, the city believed. You must feel the weight. When the house settled, it was not settled. The master went to his bed. The steward counted the keys and set the ring down like a small iron moon. The barber cleaned his blade until it showed a bent face and a shimmer. The girl with the scar fell asleep by the cistern. Manes curled his big body near the door in case anyone knocked again, and he needed to be a wall. Tiro lay on his mat. The chain at his ankle was a half circle of cool metal, a small moon to match the steward's ring. He stretched his hand and felt where the cordman's fingers had pressed him. He could still feel the marks, cold as thought. He let his mind go to the hill because, if he pushed it away, it would only throw itself back harder. He saw the path to the Esquiline, the stretch of road where tombs lined the way, little houses for dead bones. He saw the undertakers in their brown cloaks with wreaths of black ivy, men who worked for a goddess of endings. He saw the soldiers making a straight line with their bodies and shields, so the crowd would not break into the work and turn it into a different kind of show. He saw wood and rope and iron, and the way both tools and men groaned while lifting. He thought, too, of something an old man had told him his first week in Rome, when the chain on his ankle still felt like a question more than an answer. The man had said, "Rome does not only punish the body, it aims for the mind. If the body dies, the mind of the others must live with a picture it cannot forget." The old man had lifted his hand and inked a line in the air. "This is the mark," he had said. "They make it where you walk, so you step on it every day." The moon rose. A dog barked at something that did not bark back. The cross at the lane's end stood like a black stitch in the night. Somewhere a woman talked to a god in a voice like a river in a cave. Before dawn the porter stirred. Manes rolled to his feet and stretched his arms big and slow, as if winding a mill. The steward came with a cup of watered wine for each of them and a piece of bread with olive paste. He did not say good fortune. Romans saved their luck for dice. He said, "Go, return. Do not bring trouble into the door with your feet." Tiro took the bread. Cyrus appeared. "Of course he did, with a small bundle. For your hands," the boy said, pushing forward a strip of old leather the thickness of a strap. "Wrap them, if they give you a rope." Tiro took it. He did not say thank you out loud. He touched the boy's wrist, brief, the way men in the barracks touched to say things they could not afford to say. The porter lifted the bar. The street lay cold and grey. The city felt held in a bowl. Few people moved. A mule snorted steam. A thorn of light showed at the lip of the eastern sky. At the lane's end, the cross still stood, but now the shape on it was less a man and more a dark note written on a staff. Two crows hopped on the ground and argued. The plaque above the head made one last pale shine before the day pushed the moon away. Tiro and Manes walked past, not fast, not slow. Two soldiers waited at the corner, as promised, to gather the hands from the houses. Their shields hung on their backs like shells. One of them recognized Tiro and touched the mark he had made on Tiro's chest the day before with 2 fingers, a silent check. "Esquiline," he said, "keep up." They fell into a small line of other slaves drawn from other doors, a woman with robe-burn scars from the laundry, a man whose back showed old stripes through his thin tunic, a boy who walked too close to the soldier as if nearness to iron could save him. No one spoke. The only sounds were sandals on stone, a raven complaining, the soft slap of a loose strap against a calf. Past the Subura's waking stink, up the slope where poor men's gardens gave the air a green breath, toward the gate where the wall showed its teeth. This was the path. Near the old tombs, the undertaker's men gathered with their carts and poles. They wore the ivy wreaths of Libitina like crowns of shadow. Their faces were practiced into not showing any more than a hand shows when it is a tool. They did not mock. They did not comfort. They gestured to ropes, to beams, to holes already started in the ground. A rope captain, thick in the neck, pointed at Tiro and Manes. "You two, here," he said, as if calling oxen. "Under, lift on my shout, not before, not after. If you slip, I fine your breath." Tiro wrapped Cyrus's scrap of leather around his palms. He bent his knees. He put his shoulder under the heavy end of a beam that smelled of sap and old rain and something else that was not wood. He felt Manes beside him, warm, solid, a wall to lean his weight into. He looked up for one breath and saw ahead the uprights already planted in the earth like an orchard that should never have been planted. "Ready," the rope captain said. "Lift." They lifted. The wood rose the way a sorrow rises, slow, unavoidable, heavy with what it already knows. Tiro's teeth pressed together. His breath found a steady pace. The beam burned his skin through the tunic. He thought of nothing and everything. Of the hill, of the wind that came across the graves, of the old rule that turned a house into a sentence, of Cyrus's ash-dusted eyes, of the cross at the lane's end, of the question he held at night like a cold stone. How do you stay human where the cross stands? He felt the answer not come, and yet something else did, a hard thread in the middle of himself that did not agree to bend. He did not know what to call it, he only knew it was there. "Hold!" the rope captain shouted. "Down slow!" They set the beam. The ropes took the weight. The wood found its place with a sound like a door closing. "Again," the captain said, "there are more." The sky began to color in the east. The day would make everything visible. Behind Tiro, a man from another house coughed until he retched and then wiped his mouth on his arm and took his place under the next beam. In front of him, the undertaker's men nailed a placard to a post, letters cut hard into the grain. A soldier laughed once, briefly, at something only he found funny. A priest of a poor god walked by fast, with his eyes on his sandals. "Again," the rope captain called, clapping his hands once like thunder. "Again." Tiro bent. He set his shoulder, he lifted, and then, from the city side of the gate, a new sound scraped down the road like iron, a cart's wheel with a broken rim, the creak of leather stretched too far, a sharp voice shouting, make way, condemned!" The small line of slaves turned their heads because you cannot not look when the lesson arrives. The cart was coming. It carried what tomorrow's picture would be. The cart came like a slow drum. Its left wheel scraped and clacked with every turn. Leather straps groaned. The driver kept his jaw tight and flicked the reins without looking at the load. 2 soldiers walked in front to push the crowd back with their shields. 2 more walked behind. Dust lifted and hung in the morning air like smoke that did not know where to go. On the cart were the condemned. They had cords at the wrist. Each had a board, the titulus, hung on a string around the neck. The boards were cut from cheap wood and painted with thick black letters. Tiro could not read well, but he knew what such boards said: ran away, struck his master, stole, harbored the killer, did not defend. Words that were short and heavy as stones. Words that turned living people into signs. Some of the condemned had already been flogged. You could tell by the way they moved, as if their skin had been turned into a map of lines. One old man had salt in his hair and a split lip. A woman held herself so still that her stillness made her shake. A boy, not much bigger than Cyrus, sat with his eyes open too wide and his mouth set, the way boys set their mouths when they try not to cry in front of men. The cart stopped inside the gate. The soldiers cleared a space with a few quick shouts and a mock step forward that made the front rank of the crowd jump back. The rope captain pointed with his chin. "Bring the beams," he told Tiro and Manis. "Set them in line. Leave space for the posts." Tiro and Manis moved as ordered. The wood lay heavy and dumb in their arms. The underside smelled of sap, pitch and old rain. The crosspieces, the patibula, were rough where hands would go. They were thick enough that a man could not close his fingers all the way around them. "Here," the captain said, "and here." They laid 2 beams down. They stood, they breathed, they went for 2 more. The undertakers of Libitina, the Death Guild, worked in a quiet circle around them. One carried a small bucket of nails as if it were an egg. One carried rope and checked it for frayed places with quick hands. Another carried a hammer and did not swing it yet. They had faces like men who had seen everything and learned at last to see only the next task. A clerk with a new wax tablet stepped up to the cart. He read each board out loud, slow, careful, so that the sound of the words would float over the crowd and settle into many ears. He did not rush. He did not show his teeth. "His master is dead," he read for the first man. He did not come when the master called. He did not defend the master when the blade was raised. He is part of the house and shares its guilt. He looked at the second board. She knew. She did not speak. She is part of the house and shares its guilt. Third, he ran once and was marked and ran again. Fourth, he stole food when the city burned and hid it. Sixth, he lifted his hand. Sixth, he hid in the stable. Rounded flat words, they did not carry story. They carried a wall. A small murmur rolled through the crowd at Lefter his hand. It was the short phrase men used when they wanted to avoid saying the longer one that had more blood in it. A woman in the crowd drew her child close and pressed his head into her cloak so he would not see, but the child twisted and looked anyway with one eye and a breath that shook. The soldiers pulled the first man off the cart. He stumbled. An undertaker caught his arm, not gentle, but steady, so he would not fall hard and break an ankle before the picture was complete. They turned him toward the beam. They took his titulus off his neck and nailed it to a small stake at the head of the place where he would hang. The act was slow and clear. Everyone could see the hammer, the nail, the board. Everyone could read again what he was now. The rope captain looked at Tiro. "You," he said, "hold his forearm." Tiro stepped forward. He did not look at the man's eyes. He did not look at the man's arm. He looked at a knot in the wood and set his hands just above it. The man's skin was warm. It jumped once like a deer under a bush and then went still. The undertaker wrapped a strap around the wrist and pulled. The soldier nodded. Another man set the hammer against a nail to mark the place. "Not yet, Not yet. They were still arranging, still making the lines that would be seen from the road. Rope for this one, a soldier said, glancing at the board. Nails for the next. It was not random. It was part of the picture. Rope for the ones who were to be shown as weak or small in guilt. Nails for the ones to be shown as hard or big in guilt. A strong, simple lesson. Different wrongs, different pains. One end. Tiro felt the man's pulse jump again under his fingers and then slow, like a bird that had decided not to strike the cage bars anymore because the bars did not move. They tied the arms to the beam. They tied the beam to a pole. On the captain's shout, Tiro and Manes and two undertakers lifted. The wood rose. The man rose with it, arms open like a gate that would never close again. They set the beam on pegs on the upright. The straps creaked. The man's mouth opened for air that came hard and thin. His feet searched for ground that had been removed. Down, the captain said to Tiro and Manes. Next, the second was the woman who had held herself so still. When they took her down from the cart, her stillness broke, not in screams, but in a low sound, like a wheel that turns without oil. She tried to touch the board at her neck with her mouth, as if to bite the words and change them. The undertaker took the board away. He set it by the place. He did not look at her face. He had learned, everyone had learned, where not to look. Rope, a soldier said again. No, said the clerk with the tablet, eyes on his wax. Nails. The soldier glanced at him, surprised to be corrected. Why? She did not speak, the clerk said, but she is a house mother to the kitchen. The kitchen is the heart. The city must hammer the heart today, the soldier shrugged. He did not care why, only that he had a reason to give if someone asked. He lifted a hand. The undertaker with the bucket came forward. The hammer man breathed out once to steady his arm. The woman looked past the men, past the wood, past the sky, into something Tiro could not see. Hold, the rope captain told Tiro. Tiro stepped in again. He pressed the woman's forearm down to the rough wood. It felt small. It felt like the limb of a tree in winter, still and hard, with all the sap pulled inward. The hammerman set the nail. The steel nose kissed skin, and then from behind them a voice rose that had not been part of any plan. Wait! A man cried from the crowd. Wait! She pulled the child back from the killer. I saw it. She threw a stool. She fought. He stumbled forward 2 steps, wild, white. A friend grabbed his arm to hold him. I swear it, he shouted. I swear by the gods. The soldiers turned. The clerk looked up, annoyed to be forced to look up. The rope captain did not move his hand. Name, the clerk said, thin. The man in the crowd gave his name and his street too fast. The clerk wrote a small mark in the wax and did not stop the work. Appeals go to the Senate, the soldier said in a bored voice. Not here, not now. The friend pulled the man back into the crowd. The woman did not blink. The hammer fell. The sound of it was the sound of iron learning wood. Tiro kept his hand where it was because it was there. He counted 1, 2, 3 heartbeats and then let go when the rope captain flicked his eyes. The hammer fell again for the other arm. The woman's breath came high. The undertakers lifted. The beam went up. The woman rose. Tiro stepped back. He could feel the noise of the crowd in his chest like bees. The boy, not much bigger than Cyrus, was third. When they pulled him down from the cart, he stumbled and almost fell because his legs had gone to water. A soldier caught him by the collar and held him upright with one hand, the way a man holds a cat that might scratch. The boy's board said, "Hid in the stable." "Rope," a soldier said, softening just a hair. He did not want to nail a boy today if he did not have to. Some soldiers were like that. They liked order, not cruelty for sport. Others liked both. Rome had room for many kinds of men. The undertaker set the rope. He looked at Tiro and jerked his head. "Help me?" Tiro took the boy's right arm, not hard. The boy's eyes moved to Tiro's face and held there, as if it were a small island in a wide sea. His lips worked, no sound came. Tiro leaned half a finger closer. "What?" Tiro breathed. "Tell my sister," the boy whispered, so low that the word was more breath than sound. "Tell her I tried to run, and I ran back, and I should have kept running. Tell her to leave." "Where?" "Anywhere." The rope pulled tight. The undertaker nodded. Tiro stepped back. The boy looked at him one more time. His mouth made a shape that might have been a thank you, or might have been only the shape the mouth makes when a breath is taken on a hill. "Lift," the captain called. The boy rose with the beam. His feet searched. He found the upright with his heels and pushed to find space for his lungs. Tiro looked at the ground. He looked at his hands. He did not look up until the captain said, "Next." So it went. The fourth was a man who had run and been branded with the letter F on his forehead, Fug, for fugitivus. The scar was old and puckered, pale against his dark skin. He had run again anyway. That told a story all by itself. They used nails for him. The fifth was a big-body man, once a doorkeeper like Manes. He had lifted his hand. The soldiers did not like him. They enjoyed their work for one beat longer with him than with the others. The sixth was a thin man with eyes that looked used up. He said nothing. He walked when told. He climbed when told. He took rope and wood like a place he had been before in a dream. The crowd watched with faces like shields. Some were hard, some were blank, some were wet. A few boys tried to make jokes and failed and went quiet. Two men argued about whether nails or rope made a better lesson. A woman with a basket full of onions prayed under her breath and did not know which god heard. Once, a man on the edge of the crowd crossed himself, in the way you crossed yourself before a foreign altar, quick and small. His friend elbowed him hard. "Not here," he hissed. "Don't bring new gods into this." The soldiers lined their shields and kept the line from breaking. They slapped hands that reached out. They laughed at a man who shouted too much. They moved everything along. They had done this before. This was part of how the city stayed a city. Tiron's breath got steady. Work can make a man steady even when his stomach is a pot of snakes. Lift, set, step back, lift, set, step back. He felt the leather strip Cyrus had given him bite and then protect his hands. He heard the rope captain's voice as a mark on a drum. He smelled dust, iron, sweat, old wine, onions, hot brick, sun on stone, and the faint sweet rot that always lived on the far side of the Esquiline. Between lifts, he saw things he could not unsee, the way a mouth reaches for air like a fish, the way a knee shakes when it tries to push up for one more breath, the way a hand opens and closes as if it still remembers holding a cup, or a child, or a tool. He saw a raven hop sideways, bold, to peck at a knot of old blood on an old post. He saw an undertaker wipe a fly from a man's lips with the back of a knuckle as if he were a mother, and then step away without a word. He also saw the lesson's other side, slaves in the crowd who made themselves small, necks turtle low, eyes on the ground, mouths thin. Free poor who looked and then looked away with guilt like a stone, rich men who nodded as if they had written the scene themselves and were pleased with the script, a clerk who kept track of counts the way a baker keeps track of loaves. Mid-morning, a priest from the Death Guild poured a little wine on the ground and spoke 3 words to Libitina. Not mercy, not pity. Words about order, ending, and rest. The soldiers let him do it because the city likes to put a little god there too to make the picture feel complete. After the 6th beam rose, the rope captain gave the smallest of nods to the soldiers. The work path had been set. The rest of the condemned, already seeing, already learning what would be done to them, waited with their boards around their necks and their breaths too fast. The captain clapped once. "Move," he said. "We still have the one who lifted his hand to bring." The crowd stirred. a wind over wheat. The one who had lifted his hand, the phrase again, flat as a plank, had not been on the first cart. He came now in a separate push, with 4 soldiers and a centurion in a red crest to make the point. He was thick in the shoulders, face bruised, hair matted with dry blood. When they shoved him forward, he did not stumble. He kept his balance with a small, stupid pride that helped no one. He looked not at the beam, not at the sky, not at the ground, but at faces. He was searching for witness, for mercy, for something a crowd cannot give. When his eyes crossed Tyro, they stopped. Tyro looked back. He could not help it. The man's eyes were the color of river mud and sharp as a knife made yesterday. They had the look of someone who had made a choice and would not be allowed to forget it. "You," the man said to Tyro, voice raw from rope and shouting, "tell them I did not mean to kill him. I meant to frighten him. He fell, he bled, I pressed my hand, he died fast." The centurion hit him from the side with a half fist, not to break, but to shove the words back into his mouth. "Quiet. I was a groom," the man said to Tyro anyway, because a man will talk to any ear that seems to hear. "He called my sister a dog. He called me less than a tool. I lifted a hand." He laughed once, a sound with no joy in it. "Lifted a hand, see what they call it, tell them." The second blow was harder. The man turned his head with it and spat red spit on the dirt. He looked at Tyro again, and this time there was a different thing in his face. It was not hope, it was not rage. It was something like the thing that had started in Tyro the night before, a hard thread that did not agree to bend. He nodded once to Tyro, as if the two of them had made a promise neither had spoken. The soldiers cut his tunic down the back with a short knife. The cloth fell. The scars of old lashes crossed his shoulders like ropes on a boat. A new flogging put fresh lines over the old. The lictor worked with a measured arm, not wild, not sad. The crowd counted without numbers. The centurion watched the faces, not the blows. "Beam," he said when the count was done. The undertakers set the patibulum. The rope captain looked at Tyro and Manes. "Under," he said, and then he added, "Low, only for them. Steady." Tyro bent. He put his shoulder under the wood. He felt the other man's heat through the beam. He smelled iron and sweat and something like horse from the stable. He braced his feet. "Lift," the captain called. They lifted. The beam rose. The groom rose with it. He breathed deep, like a man who knows swimming and plans to swim in a river that does not want to hold him. The soldiers lined the pegs. The beam settled on them with a sound like a table set down too hard on a stone floor. "Nails," the clerk said, showing the waxboard to the centurion. "This one is to be made an example." The centurion nodded once. He did not smile. He sent for the nail bucket with a lazy flick of the fingers. The hammer man came. He set the first nail. He raised the hammer. "Wait," the centurion said. He looked at the crowd. He looked at the row of posts. He looked at the road where people passed. He picked up the groom's titulus himself and held it up high so the letters could be seen over many heads. He spoke the words not to the man but to the city. This is what it means when a slave forgets his place. He turned to Tyro. "Hold the rest." Tyro stepped in because he had been told, and because to refuse in that moment would bring a different lesson down on his head. He set his hands. He held. He did not look at the face. He looked at the wood. He felt the tendons tense under his grip. He felt the way a body tries not to move at the very moment it must. The hammer fell. 1 blow, 2, 3. The arm stopped fighting because it had nowhere to go. "Other side," the centurion said. They did the other hand. They set the feet with rope to the upright. They lifted the sign and nailed it where every eye could find it. The centurion stepped back and surveyed the line the way a builder surveys a wall. He nodded once. He turned to the clerk. "Make your note," he said. "Send it to the prefect's office. The city has done what the Senate ordered. The clerk pressed his stylus into wax. The line on the tablet was small, the line on the hill was large. The work did not end there. There was still water to be fetched for the soldiers, and cords to be coiled, and the cart to be moved, and the undertakers to be paid. There were still 2 more condemned to bind to old posts, because there were more posts than new beams. There was still the crowd to manage so it would thin and spread instead of thicken and break into a riot. There was still the day, which must go on, even when men hung on wood. The rope captain clapped Tiro on the shoulder. "Good," he said, like a man who had seen many weak hands before and was glad to find 2 that were not weak. "Go with the bucket, wash the pegs." Tiro took a small bucket, dipped a cloth and wiped the iron pegs where beams rested. It was a task meant to teach as much as to clean. The cloth turned red, then pink, then brown. The water turned the colour of old wine. A fly stuck to his finger and walked across his skin as if he were a field. He moved from post to post. At one, the thin man's eyes were closed and his mouth moved as if he were reciting a list only he could see. At another, the branded runner stared at the sky with a look like surprise that the sky looked the same today as yesterday. At the woman's post, a small thread of voice came out of her, flat and steady, naming names. Aulus, Dora, Ilithea, Old Fex, the baby, the mule, the pot with the crack, as if calling each thing in her house so it would not be lost. At the boy's post the breath was too fast. His eyes found Tiro again for one beat. Tiro did not speak, he could not. He let his face do the one small human thing it was still allowed to do. He let it soften. At the last post, the groom, the eyes did not ask, they gave. They gave a look that said, "Hold your thread. Do not become what they make you hold." The centurion called the rope captain over. He pointed to the line, to the spacing, to the angle of a sign. He was making sure the picture would read from the road. "Good," he said again, satisfied. "Leave 2 soldiers here until dusk. Rotate at noon. Do not let anyone cut them down. The dogs come at night. The guild will return." He turned. He saw Tiro with the bucket. He saw the leather strip around Tiro's hands. He saw the steadiness in the way Tiro stood. "You," he said to Tiro, as if suddenly remembering him from another room. "Where is your house?" Tiro said the master's name and the street. "You will walk in front of it today," the centurion said, "with a board." Tiro felt the ground tilt under him. "A board?" The centurion's mouth moved in what might have been called a smile if there had been any warmth in it. "The city is not done with its lesson. We have taught with bodies, now we will teach with words. We need hands to carry signs through the neighborhoods. We need eyes to see those hands and remember." He held up a clean titulus without a name, blank. He dipped a brush in thick black paint and wrote on it with quick, ugly letters. "The house that hid," the board now said. Then under it, "The Master's Street." "Carry this," he said, handing the wet wood to Tiro. "Walk the Subura once. Walk the market street once. Walk past your master's door, then bring it back." Tiro took the board. It was heavier than it looked. The paint smell was sharp and made his eyes water. The centurion leaned close enough that Tiro could see the stitches in the red crest. "Do not run," he said. "Do not hide it under your tunic. Hold it high. If someone strikes you, do not strike back. The city is speaking with your arms. Do you understand?" "Yes," Tiro said. The word had to be pushed out of his throat. He looked once at Manes. Manes's big face had gone small with worry. He looked once at the boy on the beam. The boy looked back. He looked once at the woman. She was still naming her kitchen. He set the board across his shoulder like a yoke and started down the slope toward the gate, past the line of posts, past the soldiers, past the undertakers, past the clerk, past the priest with the black ivy, past the cart with its broken wheel. The road into the city had never looked longer. At the gate, the soldier who had marked Tiro's chest the day before nodded at the board and said, without unkindness, Hold it straight. Tiro held it straight. He walked into the day. The Sabura smelled of wet stone and old smoke and frying fish. People turned to look because people always turn to look when a sign passes. Some read and spat. Some read and laughed. Some read and looked away because they did not want to be seen looking. A child pointed and asked a mother what the words meant. The mother pulled the hand down and said, "Bread first." At a corner, a pack of boys fell in behind Tiro and began to chant the words, turning them into a crude song. He did not turn. He kept walking. At a fountain, a woman carrying water stopped and stared with hate that was not for Tiro, but landed on him anyway because he was the part of the picture that could be touched. He did not open his mouth. He kept walking. A man with a lawyer's cloak read the board, pursed his lips, and nodded as if an argument he had made in his head had just been proved true. 2 streets later, near the market where the grain sellers shouted numbers and the fish sellers shouted names, a hand reached out from a doorway and touched Tiro's sleeve. He turned his head a little. It was Cyrus. The boy had come, risk and all. His eyes were wide, his mouth trembled. "I had to see," he breathed. "Are you hurt?" "No," Tiro said. "Go home." "Not until—" "Go home," Tiro said again, and he let his voice carry a tone he almost never used. Cyrus flinched. He nodded. He slipped back into the doorway and was gone, like a shadow when a cloud crosses the sun. Tiro kept walking. At his master's door, the porter stood like a statue, with his hands behind his back. The steward stood beside him, with his keyring like a small moon. The master himself stepped into the atrium's light, looked at the board, and made his mouth into a shape that could be read as sorrow by anyone who wanted to read it that way. "Hold it high," the centurion had said. Tiro held it high. He did not lower his eyes. He did not raise them. He looked at the space in front of his feet and at the curve of the letters when his arms brushed the wood. He turned at the corner. He walked back toward the Esquiline. As he neared the gate, a new sound rose behind him. The sound of sandals, many, and a voice he knew. "Stop," the steward called. "The master bids you stop." Tiro stopped, because to do otherwise would bring a soldier's blow down on both of them. The steward came close. He looked left and right. He lowered his voice until it was almost not there at all. "The master has a friend on the Senate bench," he whispered. "There will be talk, a petition, not to end the lesson, to move the last 2 to rope." Tiro said nothing. He could not trust his throat. "Do you hear me?" the steward said, sharp now. "Stand straight. Bring the board back. And tonight, if the soldiers come again, keep your mouth closed. Do not say what you think you saw." Tiro looked at the steward's face. It was calm, thin, careful. It was the face of a man who walked between 2 fires and had made it his art not to burn. Tiro turned away. He started up the slope again. The line of posts stood against the sky like a row of black teeth. The ravens had come back. The wind had picked up the smell of dust and old blood and carried it out over the fields. At the crest he stopped. He lowered the board to his chest for one breath to rest his arms. He looked at the groom. The groom looked back, and his mouth made a shape that was not a word, but meant something old. Hold. Tiro lifted the board again. He opened his mouth, not to shout, not to cry, but to whisper to himself the question he kept like a stone in his hand. How do you stay human where the cross stands? A horn sounded from the city behind him. Short, sharp, official. It meant movement. It meant men coming. He turned his head. A new cart was climbing the hill. This one did not carry the condemned. It carried a single man under a cloak with a red stripe, and 3 lictors with bundles of rods and an axe bound in. A senator's envoy. He was coming toward the posts with a sealed tablet in his hand. The envoy's cart rolled like a verdict. The lictors walked ahead with their bundles of rods bound tight, iron shining where the law allowed it to shine. The man in the cart wore a white tunic with a narrow purple stripe and a face set into one calm line. In his hand sat a tablet with a wax seal pressed flat by someone whose ring mattered. The soldiers at the line stepped back and made a gap. The undertakers lowered their voices. The crowd drew in, then out, like breath at a door. The envoy did not hurry. He stood on the cart plank so the seal could be seen. He lifted it once, high, and then spoke in a voice trained to ride over other sounds. "By order of the Senate," he said, "the executions pronounced stand. The city has shown its strength. Order holds." A murmur went through the crowd, not surprise. No one had expected the hill to turn soft, but the kind of sound people make when a thing is made official in front of their eyes. The envoy held the tablet lower and broke the seal with the flat of his thumb. He read. He lifted his head again. "There is petition," he said, each word clean. "Not to end the sentence, to alter the manner for two." The petition notes that two of the condemned are weak in body and did not have the strength to reach the master. The petition is supported by witness and by a name in good standing. He glanced once at the centurion. "The Senate permits rope for two who remain." It was a small mercy, but in a world that liked to close its hand, even a small finger left open could feel like light. The centurion nodded, not pleased, not displeased. He said, "We will do as ordered." He did not look to see who in the crowd had loosened that finger. He did not need to. Men with friends have their own roads. The envoy's eyes passed over the line of posts the way a builder's eyes pass over a new wall. He saw spacing, angles, signs. He saw the crowd, the soldiers, the undertakers. He saw Tiro with the painted board, arms square, face steady. "You," he said to the centurion, "will keep the hill secure until night. The guild will return to do what is their work. No bodies are to be cut down without license." He turned the tablet a last time, then folded it shut. "The Senate remembers the old rule," he said, "not the name men argued over in schools, not the date on a wall, just the old rule that lived under everything. A house where a master dies by a slave's hand is a rope for all, unless the house proves it fought. The city is not cruel. The city is careful. Let the people see that." He sat. The cart turned. The lictors stepped. The envoy went back down the hill to carry his seal and his calm face to the next place where a line of people must be reminded who held what. The breeze moved again. The smell of dust and iron and old wine came back. The centurion raised one hand, and with that small gesture, the machine of the hill resumed its work. "Rope," he told the rope captain, for the last two waiting at the cart, both men with shoulders sloped by years and hands swollen at the joints. "Make it clear, make it neat." The undertakers did what they always did, the thing in front of them. They looped, pulled, knotted. They set the beams, they lifted with care that was not kindness, only craft. When the two were raised, the line was complete. Wood, bodies, signs. The hill read like a page. The crowd thinned a little. The first wave had had its fill and would carry the sight home in their mouths. The boys who had tried to make jokes stopped trying. The woman with onions had gone. Sellers of water and cheap wine came close on quiet feet, not to mock, just to profit by thirst. The centurion walked the line again. He put a soldier at each end. He told two to follow Tiro with their eyes when he returned with the board. He sent one down to the gate to change the watch. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. You could feel his orders in the way air moved. Tiro stood with the sign against his chest, catching his breath. The paint smell still stung the nose. His arms shook, then steadied. He felt Manas's big hand on his shoulder, brief as a bird landing and gone. "Back," the centurion said. "Return the board." Tiro lifted it again. He started down the slope. The road looked longer now that the sun had climbed and the day had opened all its eyes. Agate, the soldier with the steady face, nodded at the board. "Good," he said, as if Tiro had hammered a straight nail. "You did not drop it." Tiro went into the city and walked the last stretch he had been told to walk. People had begun to talk softer now, as if their throats were tired from shouting. A fruit seller sliced figs with a quick hand and did not look up. A boy dipped a jar and spilled half the water and laughed at his own clumsiness, because laughter sometimes came where it should not. A group of men argued over the price of grain and pretended that the letters on Tiro's board were about another house far, far away. At his master's door, the porter stood as before. The steward was gone, working a line only he could see. The master had returned to the triclinium and the rims of his cups. The house wanted to be normal. It set itself like a broken arm made straight, with splints and cloth. Tiro passed. He did not pause. He turned the corner and climbed again. The board grew heavier the last 50 steps, the way a bucket grows heavier when you carry it home. Arms that have worked all day notice weight more than arms that have done nothing. He held it high anyway. At the crest, the centurion took the board from Tiro's hands, read it once, as if to remind himself what lesson he had sent to walk the streets, and gave it to the clerk to be stacked with other boards in a cart for use another day. "Water," he told Tiro. "Bucket. Pegs." He said it without thinking, the way a man tells his hand to grip and his foot to step. Tiro went back to the bucket and the cloth. He moved down the row again. He wiped iron again. He did not speak. He listened to the living. Words still came from the posts, because words live longer than skin. From the woman, Ola's Dora, the cracked pot, the small knife, the old lid. From the boy, small, fast breaths. From the runner, a soft curse meant for no ear but his own. From the groom, nothing for a long beat, then one word that was not a plea. "Hold." Tiro dipped the cloth. He stepped nearer the boy. He lifted the cloth as if to wipe the peg. He let the cloth pass quick across the boy's lips, as if by mistake. The boy's tongue flicked once, cat quick, to take one thread of wet. A soldier's head turned. Tiro lowered his hand like a man who had thought better of wiping a peg that was already clean. The soldier's head turned away again. The moment went back to being air. Near noon the sun sat high and heavy. Shadows drew short. The ravens waited in a broken line on a wall, tilting robber patient. The priest of the Death Guild poured another thread of wine and spoke his 3 words again. The undertakers drank a little water and chewed a piece of bread without looking at the line. The crowd thinned more. Men who had errands returned to errands. Women who had fires returned to fires. Only a few stayed, the ones who could not leave because they had relatives on the wood, and the ones who could not leave because they were built in a way that makes a man stay where pain is until someone tells him to go. The rope captain rubbed his wrists and looked at Tiro. "You work well," he said, not as flattery, just as a note you might make on a tally. "If you wanted, you could hire with us when your house leases hands." Tiro did not answer. He did not know if he could shape his mouth around "no" in a way the man would not hear as insult. He dipped the cloth again. The centurion called the clerk over and spoke in low tones. The clerk nodded, wrote, nodded. He sent a runner down the slope. The runner came back with a small leather bag, rattling softly. "Pay," the clerk said to the undertakers. He counted out coins, small bronze, then a thicker piece, each a little circle of order. Men like to tie cruel things to pay because pay makes things feel like work, and work feels like the weather, no one's fault. When the coins were done, the centurion turned to the soldiers on the ends of the line. "You," he said to the one nearest the gate, "go now and eat. You will return at mid-afternoon. You," to the other, "stay. Watch the hands." He meant Tiro and Manes, and the few from other houses who had been made into tools that morning. Men made into tools must be watched, or they might remember they are men. Tiro wiped another peg. He let his eyes go unfocused, the way a man does when he wants to look without being seen to look. He saw the groom's mouth move again. He could not hear the word this time, only the shape. He saw Manez tilt his head to crack his neck and then settle his big body into stillness again. He saw a girl at the edge of the crowd, too young to be here, old enough to be here anyway, watching the boy with the rope, her eyes wide and empty, the way eyes look when they are filling with something they do not yet have a name for. At mid-afternoon, cloud moved over the sun like a hand laid across a lamp. The light went flat. The hill looked closer. A breeze slid across the ground and brought the smell that men pretend not to smell when they say order. Iron, leather, open skin, old wine, dust. The centurion checked the posts again. He put a finger to one knot, nodded. He touched a peg, nodded. He tugged a sign, nodded. He turned to the clerk. "Send word to the prefect's office," he said. "The line is set. The crowd thins. We will hold till dusk. The city has seen." The clerk wrote the words in wax. They made a small, neat road. Then he said something the centurion almost did not hear because it was so ordinary. "There will be more tomorrow." "Of course," the centurion said. "There are always more tomorrow." Rome was a mouth that ate fear and grain. Down the slope from the city, another little push of people came, men who had worked in the morning and now had a cup and an hour before dinner. Boys who had been sent on errands and took a path that just happened to go by the hill. Two women who stood together and did not speak, only took each other's hands. Among them, thin as a reed, barefoot, hair full of ash, came Cyrus. He should not have been there. The house had been told to keep its bodies inside until the lesson ended, but the lesson had not ended and Cyrus had left anyway. Some boys cannot close their eyes when a picture is being drawn, even if the picture is meant to hurt them. He did not come near the line. He stood back of the last row of shoulders and watched. Tiro saw him because Tiro had always seen him, the way a tree sees the small bird that sleeps in its branches. He moved the bucket to the next post. He did not signal. He did not nod. He only breathed deeper once and let the breath go. Late afternoon pulled the light a little to the west. The bodies on the beams cast thin, long shadows that pointed toward the city like black fingers. The boy's breath came slower now, not because of ease, but because the hill teaches a hard rhythm. Push up, pull down, push up, pull down. If you fall out of that rhythm, your chest forgets how to be a bellows. Men curse the cross for its slowness, but slowness is the lesson. You belong to time now, not to yourself. At the woman's post, the thread of names had gone quiet. Her head rested to the side. Her fingers had stopped their small, searching work. At the runner's post, a swallow darted, low and brave, and then was gone. At the groom's post, the eyes were open and sharp, asking nothing, giving something that went beyond the frame of the day. The centurion watched the line as a farmer watches a field. He could see when a body would stop. He could see when a crowd would break. He could see when to send two soldiers to stand a pace closer to a man whose grief looked like it might turn into an act that would make another picture. A small riot, a thrown stone, a cut rope, a club made from a broken post. Dusk came slow, the way it does on long days when men have stared too hard at the sun. The priest of the guild spoke to Libitina once more. The undertakers lifted their tools, not to work the posts yet, but to put them in a cart. The centurion gave his last orders for the light. "Hold till the last man who breathes has stopped," he said. "Then two will stay. The rest will come back at dawn with the guild. We will not cut down tonight." "Crows," the rope captain said, not asking, only naming what would happen. "Crows," the centurion agreed. "Dogs, if the lines fail. You will bring more pegs." "I will bring more men." He turned then unexpectedly to Tiro. "You," he said. "What is your name?" "Tiro," said Tiro. He had never heard his name on a centurion's tongue. It sounded like a number. "You held steady," the centurion said. Do not mistake that for safety. Steady hands are used. He looked past Tiro to the city and the long road of tomorrow. He lifted his chin to the soldier by the gate. Take that boy, he said quietly, pointing with his shadow at Cyrus. He is from a house that was told to keep inside. Tyro's heart dropped through him like a stone through clear water. He did not move his feet, he did not shout, he did not turn his head too fast. He set the bucket down as if it were heavy. The soldier at the gate stepped into the thin crowd. He did not need to search. Boys who should not be where they are do not know how to stand like men yet. They stand like a shout in a library. He took Cyrus by the wrist, not rough but firm, and drew him out. The boy did not fight. He looked once at Tiro. His mouth made a shape that was part fear and part apology, and part a foolish hope that someone would say the right word and change the shape of the evening. The centurion did not enjoy it. He did not hate it. He did not think he was being cruel. He thought he was keeping the line true. What house? He asked Cyrus. Cyrus said the master's name and the street. Fast, wrong, corrected himself, then said it right. The house was counted, the centurion said. The order was given. Boys who do not listen make other boys think they do not have to listen. You will sit by the gate until the guild returns. Your steward can take you at dawn when the hill is done. He lifted a hand to end it. In Rome, small hands move large things. Tyro's mouth opened. He closed it. He felt the thread inside him pull tight until it might cut him. He looked at Manez. Manez looked back with a big, helpless sorrow that made him look like a bear tied to a post. The soldier led Cyrus to the gate and set him on a low block of stone. The boy's feet did not reach the ground. He sat like a small jug placed on a shelf by men who owned shelves. The light thinned to smoke. The first star showed, shy, then sure. The line of posts turned into black marks against a bruised sky. The ravens came down in short, hard hops. The dogs gathered where shadows gather, snouts up, noses full of news. The city's sound fell low and far. Tiro stood with the empty bucket and the leather wet in his hand. He breathed in, he breathed out. He looked at the boy on the block. He looked at the groom on the post. He looked at the centurion's face, which had gone grey with day and duty. He thought of the question he had held at night like a stone. How do you stay human where the cross stands? He had an answer now, but it was not a word. It was a thing. A body does when words are like rope. He set the bucket down. He rubbed his hands clean on his tunic. He walked, not fast, not slow, to the gate where Cyrus sat. The soldier there lifted his hand. Back, he said. Orders. Tiro did not stop. He did not reach for the boy. He reached for his own ankle chain, the small bronze ring that circled his skin like a quiet law, and he lifted it with 2 fingers so the soldier could see it clearly in the dusk. I am not running, Tiro said, voice low and even. I am bringing the boy bread. He held out a crust he had carried all day, saved from the morning's bowl without knowing why he had saved it. The soldier looked at the chain, he looked at the crust, he looked at the centurion, who turned his head, measured the distance between order and pity, the way a man measures the space between 2 fence posts, and gave no sign. The soldier lowered his hand. Tiro put the crust into Cyrus's palm. He did not touch the boy's face. He did not speak. He turned away and picked up the bucket again. He walked back to the last post in the line, the groom, and stood there with his hands at his sides, while the first dog came and the first raven hopped and the wind turned cold. Behind him, the lictor's rods were already far away. The envoy had carried his seal back inside the walls. The Senate would eat and talk and sleep. The city would wake again and ask the hill to draw another picture. Tiro stood his ground between the city and the line and listened to what the night says when men have made it heavy. He did not move when the centurion came to stand beside him. You understand, the centurion said, voice quiet. If the boy runs, I take 4 tomorrow. "He will not run," Tiro said. "How do you know?" "Because he looked like that, either run forever or never. He is not a forever runner." The centurion made a sound that might, in a softer world, have been a laugh. "You speak like a man with a roof," he said. "Go, sleep. Your house will want you early. We will need hands again." Tiro did not ask for what. He knew. The hill is hungry. It needs hands as much as it needs wood. He lifted the bucket. He walked down the slope into the city's first lamps, past the dogs, past the ravens, past the boy on the block who kept his eyes on the ground. He walked toward the door that would close on him for the night, like a lid on a jar. On the way, he passed the cross at the end of his lane. In the thin light, it was a black stitch sewn into the evening. It had held a man at dawn. It held only air now, and a memory that would not cool. He stopped for one breath. He did not look up. He let the smell and the shape pass over him like a wave. Then he went into the house. The steward stood in the atrium with the key ring in his hand. The master sat with a cup. Manes came in behind Tiro, big and quiet. "Well," the steward said. "It is done," Tiro said. "Nothing is done," the master said softly, almost like teaching. "It continues. The city runs on grain and fear. I provide one, the Senate provides the other." He drank, he set the cup down. "The boy?" "At the gate," Tiro said. "Good," the master said, and the word did not mean good. They lay down on mats, lamps lowered. The house tried to sleep. Outside, the hill did not sleep. The dogs learned the line, the ravens took their places, the city dreamed its hard, useful dreams. Tiro kept his eyes open until the dark made them close. Before they closed, he set the small answer he had found next to the small question he still carried. They did not cancel each other, they sat side by side. How do you stay human where the cross stands? You hold what you can hold. You feed who you can feed. You stand where you are told, and then, when no one is looking, you stand where you must. A footstep came in the hall. The bar lifted. The porter's voice, low. "A messenger at the door?" The steward rose. The master sat up. The keyring sang. On the threshold stood a runner from the prefect's office, hair damp with night, breath high. "Order," he said, holding out a strip of waxed cord with a mark pressed into it. "At dawn. They want 2 more hands for the hill, not the big one, the quick one, the oven boy." "Cyrus," the messenger's words hung in the air like a weight. "At dawn. They want 2 more hands for the hill, not the big one, the quick one, the oven boy." "Cyrus." The steward took the wax-marked cord between 2 fingers and turned it so the master could see the stamp. The master did not stand. He looked at the mark the way a buyer looks at the bottom of a clay jar, checking for a crack. "Answer?" the porter asked, still at the door. "The answer is that the city speaks," the master said. "We listen." He waved the steward closer. "Send the boy," he added, as if he were naming an olive to be fetched from a dish. "The guild wants quick hands." "An oven boy is quick." Tiro felt his knees make a small bend and lock again. The air in the atrium tasted of lamp smoke and wineskin. Cyrus stood in the doorway of the kitchen, thin as a reed, eyes wide, ash still dusting his lashes from a day that would not let go of him. "Master," the steward said, "careful. The boy is useful in the house. The rope captain took note of Tiro today. He works steady. You saw. The city saw. If we send one, send the steady one." The master turned his head. He looked at Tiro as if Tiro were a jar indeed, and he was tapping the side with his nail to hear the sound. "Would you go?" he asked, curious, not kind. "Yes," Tiro said. The word was small and round. It fit in the room. Cyrus made a sound in his throat. "No," he said, forgetting to be careful, forgetting to be small. "No, I will go. I can carry, I can be quick. He already went today." "Hush," the steward said, not unkind, but with a sharp edge for the sake of the boy's life. The master's mouth turned, not into a smile, but into a line that meant he had done a piece of math and liked the sum. "Send Tiro," he said. "The city prefers men who understand the work. The boy will bake my bread." The steward bowed his head in that small, flat way of his. He handed the wax-marked cord back to the runner. "Tell your captain," he said, "that the quick one will be Tiro. He will stand at the Esquiline gate at dawn." The runner nodded. He tucked the cord into his belt, turned, and went away into the night. The porter slid the bar down. The sound of it was a lid on a jar. Cyrus started to speak. Tiro lifted his hand just a little. The boy's mouth closed. His eyes shone like wet stone. "Sleep," the steward said. "You too," he added to Tiro, without looking at his face. "Do not be useless in the morning." The house lay down. The lamps went low. The pool in the atrium held a square of dark. On his mat, Tiro lay with the chain at his ankle, coiled neat as always. His body wanted to shake. He refused it. He counted his breaths and felt the leather strip Cyrus had given him pressed under his head, a thing saved for a reason his mind had not known yet, but his hands had known. How do you stay human where the cross stands? You hold what you can hold. He slept, not deep, not long. He dreamed a straight road lined with posts like tall, dark trees. He dreamed his mother tying a string around his wrist, the way mothers do when a child has learned to run. He woke before dawn to the sound of a ladle knocking a pot, to the smell of hot water, to the small whisper of feet. Cyrus was there first, of course. He had a crust of yesterday's bread and a piece of linen. He set them by Tiro's mat, as if setting down gifts in a shrine. "For your hands," he said, repeating the same words as before, because some words do not wear out even when said twice. "And for your mouth, if they make you walk again." Tiro sat up. He took the bread and the linen and the leather strip and pushed the bread back into Cyrus's palm. "Keep this one," he said. "Bake another for me tonight." Cyrus swallowed. He nodded. He did not trust his throat. The steward came with a cup of watered wine and a look that said nothing except "move." Manes lifted the bar. The street lay grey and cold. Tiro stepped into it with the leather in his hand and the chain at his ankle light, a thin circle that rang in his head like a small bell. The same soldier waited at the corner, the one with the steady eyes and the dust print of yesterday. He touched Tiro's chest with 2 fingers where he had touched before, a quick check as you check a knot. "Keep up," he said. "The hill waits." They gathered other hands from other doors, a man with a stitched ear, a woman with a washer's shoulders, a thin old slave with a scar like a small river cutting across his cheek. No one spoke. The city had learned to walk in silence to the places where it taught its lessons. Up the slope, past the tombs, through the gate. The Esquiline opened like a plane, with a row of black teeth at one edge. The undertakers were already there, and the soldiers and the rope captain with his voice like a drumbeat. The centurion stood with the red crest that looked dull in the early light. The ravens had left only for an hour and then returned, as if they too served a law. "Under," the rope captain said. "Lift on my shout. Not before, not after." Tiro wrapped the leather. He bent his knees. He found his breath and held it steady in his chest, the way a man holds a bowl of water with 2 hands so as not to spill. It was not the same work as yesterday, and yet it was the same. The bodies on the beams were fewer now. Some had gone slack in the night. A dog had worried at a foot where rope had loosened. A soldier had driven the dog off and twisted the rope again, and then sat with his head on his hand and watched the sky grow pale, like a man who wanted to be baking bread, instead of watching breath leave a stranger. The undertakers set new beams for others who had been judged in the dark between yesterday and today. Because Rome sleeps, but never for long. Again the cart came, again the clerk read the boards, again the city made pictures out of bodies and wood and sun. Tiro worked. He did not watch faces, he watched knots. He watched pegs. He set his shoulder, he lifted at the right time, he set down slow, he counted when he had to count. He wiped the iron when he was told to wipe it. He took water to a soldier whose lips had cracked white in the cold. There is a kind of obedience that is not surrender. It is a way to stay alive and stay ready for the one use you will allow yourself. Mid-morning, the centurion moved down the line and stopped where Tiro stood with the bucket. "You," he said, "go with the undertaker's cart to the far side. Fetch posts that have fallen. The wind caught them in the night. We do not leave them lying where boys can take them for fire." Tiro nodded. He climbed onto the cart, beside a man from the guild with ivy in his wreath that had gone dry and brittle. The cart rolled with a softer wheel than yesterday's. They moved along the ridge to a dip where the ground fell, and the city noise fell with it. You could hear your breath, and the cart, and the birds. You could hear that men had tried to sleep and could not. They lifted 2 fallen posts, old, dark, scarred by weather and time, and set them back up and set stones around their feet so they would stand again. They worked like men who repair a fence after a storm. It was plain work. It also made a picture that would last another day. On the way back, the undertaker said, as if remarking on the wind, "You have steady hands. They will use you." "I know," Tiro said. "You should eat," the man added in the same flat tone. He reached into his cloak and handed Tiro a fig that had been pressed and dried until it looked like a small brown coin. "Libitina does not ask men to work on an empty belly." Tiro took it. He chewed. The sweetness broke in his mouth like something from a different world. When he had swallowed, he said the only true thing he could think to say, "Thank you." The man nodded. He had good eyes. They had seen too much and still had room to see one more thing. The cart creaked back to the main line. The centurion lifted a hand. The rope captain called. Tiro set his shoulder under wood again. The day climbed. The sun burned. The line of posts read itself to the city. Near noon, a small figure appeared at the edge of the crowd and stood without moving. You could have missed him if you looked at faces and not at stillness. It was Cyrus. He did not come close. He did not lift his hand. He stood where he could see Tiro's back and know that the thing he loved in the world was still breathing. The soldier at the gate saw him too. He started to move. The centurion caught his sleeve and shook his head once. "Leave him," he said. "He stands outside the lesson and learns enough." He did not think he was being kind. He thought he was being efficient. By mid-afternoon, the work slowed. The last cart for the day had been emptied. The soldiers had eaten. The undertakers had counted their nails. The priest of the guild had spoken the short prayer to the goddess who minds the endings of things. The centurion had sent a runner with a wax tablet to say, "The city's lesson stands. The crowd has seen. The hill is held." Tiro wiped another peg. His hands were raw under the leather. He could feel each heartbeat in the skin there, like a drum behind a wall. He looked once at the groom, the man who had met Tiro's eyes and given him that hard, wordless thing. The groom was still alive. His breath came slow now, steady in a rhythm that did not belong to him, but to the wood and the rope and gravity. His eyes found Tiro again. They asked nothing. They said the same thing. "Hold." And then an old woman came up the slope, thin as a reed, bare feet black with dust. She had a small bundle tied in cloth against her chest. A soldier put out a hand to stop her. She stopped before the hand touched her. She tilted her head like a bird, as if listening for a sound under the surface noise. "Which is the one who hid?" she asked, in a voice that had the crackle of dry twigs. "I came yesterday too late. I have walked all night. The house belonged to my niece." The soldier did not point at a face. He pointed at a board on a post. The woman looked. The woman nodded. She did not cry. She took the small bundle from her chest and untied it. It was a little loaf, hard as a stone. "You cannot feed the dead," the soldier said, not unkind. The old woman set the loaf on the ground anyway, and with 2 fingers she pushed a crumb against the post, as if to say a thing her language could not say in that place. Then she stood with her hands at her sides, and breathed in and breathed out and turned away. She had come to see that the world was still the world. It was. She went home. The light began to turn. The shadows pulled long. The wind that smelled of the river rose and moved dust across the hill in low sheets. The centurion walked, for the last time that day, from one end of the line to the other. He checked knots, he checked signs, he checked the crowd, which had thinned to fewer than 100. He checked the hands, which had done what hands were told. He stopped where Tyro stood. "Enough," he said. "The guild will sit the hill tonight. We will hold 2 at the ends. The rest of you, back to your doors." Tyro looked once at the boy on the rope, who was still breathing. He looked once at the woman, who was not. He looked once at the groom, whose eyes were open. He did the smallest thing he could do that would not cost a life. He set the wet cloth at the foot of the groom's post, where a foot might find it, where a mouth might find it if a hand could not. The centurion did not see, or he did and chose not to speak. Sometimes a man does that and then tells himself later that he did not see at all. It keeps the line straight in his mind. Tyro walked down the slope. Cyrus slipped from the edge of the little crowd and fell in behind him by 3 paces, not beside him, because boys in Rome learned to make themselves look like shadows, even when their hearts are loud. At the gate, the soldier with the steady eyes counted the hands that left. He moved a small bead on a string from one side to the other. He did not count Tyro's breath. He did not count Cyrus at all. In the Subura, the day had done what days do. Fish were sold, bread was broken, lamps were lit, stories were told with gestures and missing parts. A man laughed too loud and then fell quiet. A woman sang to a child. Boys ran until a shout turned them back into walkers. They reached the lane. The cross at the end was empty again, a black stitch on the sky. It held memory now, which is a kind of weight that wood can carry, even when no body hangs. Inside the door, the steward's key ring chimed. The master looked up from a plate. "You returned," he said, as if saying, "You have come back with the accounts." Tyro bowed his head once. He did not tell what he had seen. He did not tell what he had done. He put the leather strip on a shelf. He put the linen away. He washed his hands in a bowl and watched the water curl brown, then clean, then brown again. Cyrus came to the corner of the kitchen and stood. He had baked the bread. It sat on the hearth, round and cracked, smelling like the only kindness Rome allowed to be warm. "Eat," the steward said, short, efficient. He had learned that men do not die when you let them eat. They work better. Tyro ate. He chewed. He felt the bread go down. He felt the day sit on his shoulders and then slide to the floor like a heavy sack. He lay on his mat. The chain was a curve of cool metal again. He closed his eyes. He opened them. The question he had carried, the one he had held like a stone, did not feel like a weight that night. It felt like a handle. How do you stay human where the cross stands? You do not argue with the wood. You do not fight the rope with your teeth. You do the small thing you can do inside the line drawn by men who think the line is a god. You wrap a boy's hands. You lift when the lifting will save a neck from breaking wrong. You wipe the peg so a mouth can touch water. You carry the board and you do not add your own hate to it. You look at the man who looked at you, and you let the seeing pass between you like a cup that holds nothing but still nourishes. This is not victory. Rome does not give victories to men like you. But it is not nothing. A thread is not nothing. A thread can tie a man to himself. Days passed. The hill kept working. The city kept learning the same lesson over and over. Because that is what cities do. They repeat things until the sound becomes the walls. There were more carts. There were more boards. There were days when the envoy did not come, and days when he did. There were nights when the ravens were bold, and nights when the wind kept them away. There were women with hard little loaves, and men with bare heads, and boys who should not have been there, who came anyway and learned a thing they would not say out loud until they were old. Tyro worked. He lifted, he wiped, he carried. Sometimes he was sent with a board again. He held it, he walked the streets, he did not lower it. The children sang the words. The mothers hushed them. The rich men nodded. The poor men scowled. The baker gave him the heel of a loaf once and looked away so he could say later he had not done it. Sometimes in the early grey before the hill, Tyro went to the gutter and looked at the empty cross in the lane and did not look up, and the raven made its dry sound, and the river smell came like a tired breath, and he let the picture pass over him and through him, and he did not break. Cyrus grew. Boys do that even when a city tries to make them small. His shoulders widened. His hands learned heat and dough and the timing of ovens. He did not go to the hill unless sent. He went once more when he was older and stood where he could see Tyro's back and then turned away before the soldier could see him. Manes kept the door. The steward counted his keys. The master bought grain and told himself stories about order and fear, about how the city ran on both and how he provided one and the Senate the other. And he slept. Men like him sleep. One evening, months from the day of the envoy's seal, the hill was quiet. There were posts still, yes. There are always posts as long as cities fear the people who feed them. But the wind had a clear taste. The sky over the Esquiline was clean and flat and far. Tyro and Cyrus sat in the kitchen after the last lamp was trimmed. The oven was warm, a small, honest sun. Cyrus broke a small loaf and handed half to Tyro. "You never told me," he said, not as a demand, just as a simple human wanting to know. "Why did you go instead of me?" Tyro looked at the bread. He looked at the thin scar the leather had left on his palm where it had rubbed the same place day after day until the skin learned its shape. He said the truth in words a boy could put in his pocket. "Because I could hold the beam," he said, "and because you would have watched and learned a way of looking I do not want in your eyes yet." Cyrus nodded. He put that in his chest the way boys put a smooth stone in a pouch and carry it for luck. He chewed, he swallowed, he breathed. They sat in the quiet. The house for once had no order to give. The city for once did not call their names. They heard the small night sounds that are not commands, water in the courtyard trickling, a mouse behind a jar, a far-off wheel. "Do you still ask it?" Cyrus said at last. "What? How to stay human?" "Yes," Tyro said, "but it is not a question now, it is a habit." He stood. He took a jar to the pool and filled it and brought it back and set it down. He smoothed the breadcloth. He looked at the door to the lane. He looked at the piece of sky above the pool where one star sat, patient, like a nail that holds the roof, and yet does not look like a nail at all. "Listen," he said to Cyrus, "because boys need words, and because sometimes a man can make a small shelter out of words when wood will not bend. This is why the cross terrifies us. Not only because it hurts. Pain is a storm. It comes and it goes. The cross is slower. It turns a death into a lesson. It is public. It is placed where eyes must pass. It says, your body, your breath, your time are not yours. It tells the living that even if they did nothing, they are not safe, because the house is one body and can be punished as one. It says, even if you are innocent, the city may need you to be a picture. Cyrus listened. He did not blink. And yet, Tyro said, we are not only pictures. This is what they do not own. They cannot claim your small choices inside their large line. They cannot stop your hand from sharing bread. They cannot stop your eyes from meeting another pair of eyes and holding steady. They cannot stop you from wrapping leather around your palms and lifting when lifting is needed and refusing to lift when lifting would turn you into what they want you to be. If you remember that, even a little, the picture fails a little, and sometimes a little is a lot. Cyrus breathed out, a sound like a door opening. He put his half-loaf down and looked at Tiro as if trying to mark every line of his face the way a scribe marks a page so the words will not fade. "Teach me to count breath," he said. Tiro smiled with only half his mouth, the way men smile in cities that do not like smiles to be wide. "1," he said. "2," he tapped the table. "3, when the world shouts, you count. When the world shakes, you count. When you cannot move, you count. When you can move, you choose. That is all." They counted for a while, quietly, with the oven warm and the house asleep and the city outside being a city. When they stopped, the night had shifted. A cart rolled in the lane. The raven on the roof beam made its dry sound. The moon laid a pale bar of light across the floor. Years would pass. The senates would change faces and still be the Senate. The guild would teach sons what their fathers had done. The hill would have days of quiet and days of work. Posters would carry boards. Boys would grow. Men would bend. Women would whisper names into the air and push crumbs against posts and go home. But some things would also pass from hand to hand in kitchens and courtyards and slave quarters at the edge of fields, a leather strip, a way of counting, a habit of looking, a belief that a thread is not nothing. And that is the meaning the city could not choke. Public crucifixion terrified every Roman slave, because it was meant to. It was a slow order, shouted in the language of wood and iron and sun. It told the living that they belonged to other men's hours and that their bodies could be turned into warnings. It made a house into one throat that could be cut for a crime committed by one hand. It placed the lesson at gates and roads so the mind could not look away. It worked not only on skin, but on sleep. And yet even a lesson that big cannot close every small door. Inside the lines drawn by fear and grain, a person can still do human things, small, stubborn, careful things. They do not undo the posts. They do not break the rope, but they keep a person from turning into only a sign. Tiro rose and put out the lamp. The room went soft. The oven kept its quiet heat. Cyrus lay down on his mat and wrapped his arms around himself the way boys do who are learning they must be their own blankets. Tiro lay down too. He felt the chain. He felt the cool floor. He felt the place on his palm where the leather had left its mark. He closed his eyes. He did not see the hill. He did not see the cross. He saw a string around a child's wrist, tied by a mother on a hillside where time grew. He held the picture the way you hold a cup. He let it sit. He counted, once, twice, a third time. Outside, the city breathed. The night turned. The cross at the lane's end stood against the stars like a black stitch that could not be pulled out. But inside a small square house with painted walls and a pool of dark water, a man and a boy slept without fear for one night. And in the morning, when the sun rose like a dull coin and warmed almost no one, the city would ask its people to play their parts again. Some would. Some would not. Some would do both. And the story of how to remain a person where the cross stands would go on being learned, one breath at a time.